great innovations come from great questions. The quality of your life, in any area of your life, will be determined by the kind of questions you have the courage to ask yourself in that area. If you don't ask the right questions in life, you're not going to get the right answers. If you don't get the right answers, you can't build the right strategy. If you can't have the right strategy, you will never get the right results. So regardless of what you do in life, you got to ask the right kind of questions. Questioning is an art. It is a skill that you can develop, and you can get good at it. Now, in this last close-up session, I don't want to talk about what I'm doing. I want to talk about what you're doing, and I want to suggest to you 8 questions of innovation. You need to write these down. Because regardless of what you're doing, these are the questions that will help you innovate, whether you're in an organization, a non-government NGO, or in a one-man band. These are questions you need to know. They're the things that promote innovation. I call them the 8 nations of innovations. Now, the 8 nations of innovations are not geographic. They are imaginations. They're the nations in your mind. These are the questions, the 8 questions I used to build Saddleback, the Purpose-Driven Movement, the Global Peace Coalition, and a number of other organizations. Number 1, the first question you have to ask is the termination question. And the first question is this: what do I first need to stop? If you're burning the candle at both ends, you're not as bright as you think you are. You can have so many irons in the fire, you put out the fire. And so you first ask, what do I need to stop doing before you start anything new? Now, the great Austrian economist Joseph Schumpeter used to call this creative destruction. My mentor, Peter Drucker, used to call it systematic abandonment. I say it like this: when the horse is dead, dismount. It's a real key to success. And some of you are on horses that may have been dead for a long time, but you're still trying to beat it to make it get through in the race. When I used to meet with my mentor, Peter Drucker, and I'd walk in, the first thing Peter would say is, Rick, don't tell me what new you're doing. Tell me what you've stopped doing. He would always make me tell him what I had stopped doing first before I could tell him all the new things that I was excited about. That is termination. Termination is often the key to future innovation. At Saddleback Church, for many years, we had a midweek Bible study. We had 1,000 people coming to this Bible study, which is more than most people have on a weekend. And we had 1,000 people. And one day, we just decided to end it, just terminate it. Why? Because we weren't satisfied with 1,000 people. We said, let's decentralize it and put it into small groups. And so today, because we terminated our midweek service, we now have 32,000 people in Bible studies in over 5,000 small groups from Santa Monica to San Diego. Every city in Southern California has a Saddleback small group in it. I would have never had 5,000 small groups if I hadn't terminated that midweek service. We had to start with something. So you stop before you start. Termination. Second question, the second nation is the question of collaboration. Collaboration. Collaboration is the question where you ask yourself, or coordination, how do we do it faster? How do we do it larger? How do we do it cheaper with a team? Now, you have heard multiple people say today, you got to get a team. If you're going to be an innovator and you want it to grow beyond you, you've got to get a team. If you want to have a movement, you've got to get a team. Whatever you got to do, you've got to have collaboration. And collaboration or coordination means you get some partners. Now, those partners can be paid or those partners can be volunteers. One of the secrets of Saddleback's growth is we figured out how to mobilize literally thousands of volunteers. One day a few years ago, we decided we were doing this thing called 40 Days of Community. And we thought, why doesn't our church feed every homeless person in Orange County during this 40 days? So we call it 40 Days of Community. We'll feed every homeless person in Orange County 3 meals a day for 40 days. Now, we had no idea how many homeless people there were in this county. If we had known, we probably wouldn't have done it. We added it up. It was 42,000 homeless people. But we did it. And we fed 42,000 people 126,000 meals a day for 40 days. How do you do that? There's only one way: coordination. You can't have that kind of innovation. You can't feed that many kind of people. It took over 9,200 volunteers preparing, fixing, sending, delivering food and things like that. You've got to have coordination. We've just done a thing where we just took 14,500 of our members to every nation in the world. 195 nations in the world. There are 193 that are part of the UN. The only 2 nations in the world not a part of the UN are Serbia and North Korea. But we said we're going to go to every nation. And we're going to do a thing called peace. Promote reconciliation, equip leaders, assist the poor, care for the sick, educate the next generation. How do you do that? Coordination. Okay, number 3. Third rule you have to ask yourself is this, and that is combination. And you have the combination question is, what could we mix together to create something new? Okay, what could we mix together? What could we blend? What could we merge? What could we bring a union in, a synthesis of? And often in a combination question for innovation, you say, how could we take things that are the exact opposite and put them together, like icy hot or sweet and sour, or, peanut butter and chocolate, and you get a Reese's cup. And a lot of innovation is actually taking 2 existing things and creating a combination. You bring them together. You put them together. One of the things we did, over 20 years ago at Saddleback is we combined the 12 steps of AA with the 8 Beatitudes of Jesus and created a new thing called Celebrate Recovery. It is now the official recovery program in 17 state prison systems. It's used by tens of thousands of churches. Over 15,000 people at Saddleback have gone through Celebrate Recovery. Why? Because we just did a combination of taking 2 existing things, 12-step and 8 Beatitudes, and put them together and created something new that was different. That's a question. Okay, and number 4, let me give you another one. After combination, this is a big one, elimination. Elimination is the question where you ask yourself, what part could we take out in order to make it simpler? I wish a lot of software developers would learn this one. A good friend of mine is Steve Case, who founded AOL and a bunch of other things. And Steve was saying, we always overestimate the amount of complexity people will put up with. Isn't that the truth? What we need is to make it simpler. And simpler means you need to take stuff out, not keep adding more features, but taking stuff out to make it simpler. What could we take out that'll be simpler? What barrier could we remove that'll make it more accessible? What complexity can we get rid of to make it easier? And that's what's called taking down the borders. And it may be emotional borders, it may be mental borders, it may be financial borders, it may be ethnic borders or religious borders or whatever. Matthew Peterson said it earlier. I wrote this down. He said, how do we eliminate the language barrier in teaching math? Brilliant. That's an elimination question. That's one of the nations of innovation. How do you take it down? When I moved here in 1980, and I was 25 years old, and I was going to start a church, and I thought, Mission Viejo is where I started, and the land was costing $1 million an acre then, and I thought, I'm going to need at least 50 acres. And I thought, now that's ridiculous. And we all had a big laugh about that. And I thought, okay, at the price of land in Orange County, how in the world could I ever build a church the size that I can imagine in my mind? So what did we eliminate? The need for a building. We said, let's be the first church in the world to prove that you can be a large church without a building. So we went 15 years without a building. Most people don't know this. Saddleback grew to over 10,000 in attendance before we built our first building. We were using 4 different high schools. We were using camps. We were using banks. We were using parks. We were using stadiums. We were using tents. In the first 13 years of that church, we used 89 different facilities in Orange County. We said, this is a church where if you can figure out where we are this week, you get to come. So we only really want intelligent people, so if you can't find us, you're not worthy. So what do you do? What do you do when you got a barrier? You just remove it. Well, we can't get land, so what? We'll build a church without land. So we were running over 10,000 in attendance, one of the largest churches in America, without a building. Now, it meant setting it up and taking it down every week, but we removed the barrier. Here's another one, number 5. Reincarnation. Reincarnation question of innovation is this: what has died, but we could bring it back to life in a new form? You know, as a business, you should go out there and look and say, what worked 20 years ago, but it died, but if you could bring it back in a new format, it might have some new life in it. That's reincarnation. You take an old idea that's gone dead and you just reformat it. For 2,000 years, the Christian church has done systematic training. If you're Catholic, you know what it's called. It's called catechism. I see that hand. God bless you. Is there another? Yes, God bless you. The point is that catechism is a systematic, sequential process by which you learn this, then this, then this, then this. Now, it had pretty much died. So what do? We did a reinvention of it. We did a reincarnation of it. And we started using the internet, and we put the tech in catechism. And we've had thousands and thousands and thousands of people go through it. We just took an old idea and tweaked it, reincarnation. Another one, number 6, this is related, rejuvenation. The rejuvenation question of innovation is this: how could we change the purpose or motivation for doing it? This is really important. How could we change the purpose or motivation for what we're doing? We're not changing what we do, but we change why we do it. Muhammad said it on the video, Muhammad El-Arian. He said, you know, guys, it's not just what you do that's innovative, it's how and why you do it. I wanted to stand up and shout. That's exactly right. It's how and why you do it. And sometimes changing the how and why. There are 1 billion health plans in America. And Daniel Amen came out here and told you about the Daniel plan. What did we do on that? Well, it's not rocket science. We just changed the motivation, changed the delivery system, and created an innovation where, as he pointed out, in our church we are losing an average of 4,000 pounds a day since January. Why? We just did a little rejuvenation on the purpose of it. Number 7, the illumination question. The illumination question. And the illumination question says, how can we look at this in a new light? You need to ask yourself that. Because you don't look at everything in fresh eyes after you've been working with it for a while. You got to put some illumination on it, look at it with new eyes. You know, a number of years ago, the bathroom mirror in our bathroom cracked. And when the big crack went through the middle of it, it really bugged me the first day. I said, we got to change that. But I didn't change it. And a couple of days later, I said, that really bugs me. But we didn't change it. About a week later, it still bugged me, but not much. 6 months later, it was still there. Why? Because human beings have an amazing adaptability quotient. And we get used to stuff, and all of a sudden we don't see it anymore. And it takes some new eyes to come in and see it in a new way. So what do? Several of the people have said it today. All I'm doing is summarizing what everybody else has already said. Go out and ask your customers. Go out and ask your competition. Go out and ask a focus group. Go out and just anybody outside of your own organization to figure out, how could we do this in a new way? A few years ago, before President Obama came in President Bush's last year, he asked me to be the closing speaker for the Global Summit on Malaria. And I said, okay. So I stood up and I said, I'll take 5 minutes and let me just show you why we will never be able to solve the global problems unless we think on them in new ways. And I said, let me give you an example. One of the countries we're working in is Rwanda. I said, Rwanda's 10 million people. It's a small country. and it's divided into north, south, east, and west, and a central province. And I put up a PowerPoint, said, here's the western province of Rwanda. 2 million people and 1 doctor. No nurses, not a single registered nurse in that province. 1 doctor, 2 million people. Now I said, now watch this. And I put up the 3 dots on that. I said, here are the 3 hospitals in that province. Now, there wasn't anybody actually trained to run it, but they had these hospitals opened, and they were run by, medics and volunteers. And if you got there, there's no guarantee you were going to go in. And once you got in, you had to bring your own food because they weren't not going to serve you any food. And but I said, now, by the way, of these 3 hospitals, 2 of them are Christian. They're church-based. So you wouldn't have 2/3 of your health care if it weren't for churches. So now let me show you the next picture. And I put up 18 dots. I said, now here are the 18 clinics. Now that's better than 3 hospitals because it was 2 days' walk to the nearest hospital. It's 1 day's walk to the nearest clinic. But if you've gone anywhere in the developing world, you know that a clinic often means a bottle of aspirin on the shelf, and that's it. I have been in those 18 clinics, and one of them had a microscope and no medicine. That was it. That was their clinic. I was in another one had nothing but a little closet, and a woman was given the birth in that closet. That was their clinic. But at least that's better than 2 days' walk. It's only 1 day's walk. But if you're sick and you've got diarrhea and you're throwing up, you don't want to go 1 day's walk to get an aspirin or whatever. I said, oh, by the way, 16 of these 18 clinics, they're church-based. So you wouldn't have most of those if it weren't for churches. I said, now let me point out something else. I put up a 3rd map, and there were dots all over. It was black with dots, dot, 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 dot. It just covered. I said, here are the 826 houses of worship. Now, where would you like to get your health care? 2 days' walk, 1 day's walk, or 5 minutes away? Melinda Gates is a friend of mine, sitting on the front row, stands up and says, Rick, I get it. We could use churches to be the distribution center for health care. Oh, I said, not just that. Education, job training, and everything else. I said, I'm going to prove it. So 24 months ago, we went to that province, and we asked, anybody want a house of worship, want to train healthcare workers? Because we have no doctors except 1 in this thing. 18 churches said, well, yeah, we'll do it. This is teaching you to think in a new light. 18 pastors said, we'll do it. And 2 Muslim imams said, we'd like to do it. I said, fine, come on in. So we took those 38 people. They asked them each to get 2 people each from their congregation. And we trained them. And the first thing we trained them in is simple stuff. Boil water. Wash your hands. Hang the sheets out to dry in the sun so they're sterilized. How to do sanitary things. And then we started teaching them simple stuff like how to dress a wound, then how to stitch a wound. And then more complex stuff like how to administer ARVs to people dying of HIV/AIDS. Those 36 people were trained, and we each gave them 7 families a day to visit. And then they went out and they got 36 more, and it began to double exponentially. And then there were 200, and then there were 400, then there were 1,800, then there were 1,600. I got the report yesterday. We now have 2,900 trained healthcare workers 2 years later in a province that 2 years ago had 1 doctor. Okay, now, I could tell you stories like that all day about the peace plan of planning churches, equipping leaders, promoting reconciliation, assisting the poor, caring for the sick, educating the next generation. The point I want you to make is we would have never thought of it unless we had looked at it in a new way. You've got to use illumination. One more. Let me just give you one more and we'll shut it down. Fascination. That's the 8th nation of innovation. Fascination. And that is, how could we make it more interesting? That's the 8th question you want to ask in innovation. Whatever you're doing, how can we make it more interesting? How can we make it more appealing? How can we make it more attractive? How can we make it more mesmerizing? Now, friends, and Joe talked about this. It's no secret that our nation is in trouble right now. We have massive nation-falling debt, creating a collapse if we don't have some responsibility. And we have all kinds of other social problems in our nation right now that are not just something we can put a Band-Aid on. The kind of debt that we have right now, we will never be able to save enough to get out of debt, to conserve enough. The only answer is innovation. And it is innovation in every sector. Innovation in health. And by the way, people ask me, are you interested in healthcare reform? And I say, no, I'm not. I'm interested in health. I'm interested in reforming health. Healthcare means after you're already sick. I want to reform health, like what Daniel Amen and several of the others talked about today. But we have to have innovation in education, innovation in technology, innovation in business, innovation in the arts, innovation in faith, innovation in every sector of society. Let me just summarize it all. What TED's all about. Never stop learning. Never stop learning. I said it when we started the day. All leaders are learners. The moment you stop learning, you stop leading. Growing organizations require growing leaders. The moment you stop growing, you stop leading. God bless you.